Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time.
Welcome back to the Brain People Podcast. I'm Amanda Anguish. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I have with me my co-host,
Dr. Daniel Binus, and I'm a psychiatrist.
Yeah, and we're continuing our topic, resilience in the face of stressful situations. And right now we're going to talk about some practical things that we can do. And one of the first things we're going to start with is, what can we do physically to help us become more resilient?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And again, I think the context is really important, that when we're talking about stress, none of us initially like stress per se.
I love it.
Except for Amanda.
No, I'm just kidding.
That's why
Depends how much.
That's why her last name is Anguish. She enjoys pain, right?
No pain, no gain. That's really corny. I didn't say that. Sorry.
But the point being, and we made this point when we were talking previously in our other episode on resilience, is that, not all stress is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, stress can help us to grow and to become stronger people in the end. And when we think about things that we can do to actually increase our resilience, to increase our ability to handle stress, I always like to think about things in a holistic manner. I mean, really, that's what this podcast is all about, right?
Yeah.
Is whole person mental health interventions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to break it down into mind interventions, which is really what we touched on in the last episode.
Yeah.
We'll touch a little more briefly on that in this episode, but then also body interventions, physical health things that we can do to increase our ability to handle stress. And then also spiritual health things that we can do, things for our spirit. So when we're talking about, from a physical health body perspective, there's actually some really cool things that we can do to increase our ability to handle stress. And the thing that I always tell our patients first that will jumpstart your mental health quicker than anything else is, you know what?
Hydrotherapy?
Not quite.
No, exercise?
Exercise, yes. Exercise.
When you said jump start, I was thinking the cold, and that would, we'll get to that in a moment.
Yes, we will get to that.
So exercise.
But exercise is actually a great way. It is stressful, cortisol levels actually increase, which is the stress hormone when we exercise, but it's only transiently. So it's not like that toxic long-term exposure to cortisol that can be harmful.
And we all need some cortisol, right? We wouldn't do anything if we didn't have cortisol going through our body.
Yeah, cortisol, the stress hormone, it gets this bad rap, but it's actually very helpful. It helps to regulate the immune system. It actually acts as a feedback molecule to help shut down the fight or flight. The dangerous part with cortisol is when it's elevated all the time, chronically. But when it's transiently, like with exercise, for example, it actually helps the body to learn to adapt to other stressors, like emotional stressors, relational stressors, et cetera, so that when we face other stressors, now we can respond more appropriately.
I'm so embarrassed that I said hydrotherapy because I know the benefits of exercise.
No. Don't be embarrassed because, and maybe, I don't know, maybe you're more apt to do hydrotherapy than exercise.
No,
Amanda.
it's exercise. But you just said that jump start thing, and I thought hydrotherapy right away.
No, because hydrotherapy is actually another one we can do for our physical health that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And hydrotherapy also, and I know you've tried it. I know I do it most mornings in the shower, and it actually does stress our bodies. Like, my heart rate increases, and
especially the first and the second time.
Yes. Yeah. But that initial stress, even though it increases the adrenaline and all of that, in the long run, science actually shows that it helps both physically and mentally. It increases endorphins. It increases neuroplasticity, which is our positive brain changes that can take place. And it also actually stimulates the immune system in a really healthy, positive way, which of course helps fight infections. But when you're getting your immune system properly regulated, that can also decrease inflammation in the body, which is important not only physically, but also mentally too.
Absolutely. A lot of inflammation in the brain, from what I hear, is a precursor to depression and anxiety and stuff. So we definitely don't want that. Anything else physically that we can do besides exercise and hydrotherapy?
Yeah, one of the other big things is diet is actually very important. And there's different things that you can think about there. I mean, the ideal diet is a whole food, plant-based diet, and just in general. But as far as that whole principle that we're talking about is short-term stress, actually leading to long-term more resilience, is intermittent fasting. So there's a lot of studies that actually show if you, for example, eat 2 meals a day, or you're eating breakfast and lunch, and you're eating all your food within about 8 hours, and you forego your third meal. Yeah, it's a bit stressful. You might want to eat that.
Psychologically, sometimes more than physically.
That's true. But that actually makes dramatic positive brain changes. It even increases like BDNF, which is what we call kind of brain fertilizer, if you will. And also helps the brain cells to increase their energy production. And so there's a lot of positive benefits to doing intermittent fasting.
Sounds like our cars too. Like if we put good fuel in our cars, they work better. They're more resilient to things versus putting bad fuel in a car, then it's not quite as resilient. I did remember though, we kind of went over hydrotherapy and we didn't even explain what it was.
That's true.
And a lot of people may not know what we know what it is, so I just assumed, but our listeners may not know what hydrotherapy is. So maybe we should explain what hydrotherapy is.
Amanda, since you're such a big fan, why don't you do that?
Well, what I know of hydrotherapy, which I have done it quite a bit, and I can say it is stressful, but it's one of the most exhilarating things too when you're done. And it is, yes, it's easier to do in the summertime than in the winter. But hydrotherapy is hot and cold. You can do it in the bath or in a hot tub and cold bath, or you can do it even in the shower. And one of the things we recommend in hot and cold tubs, if you want to do it that way, you can spend 5 minutes in a hot tub, maybe max 107 degrees. And then, so you do that for 5 minutes, and then you go into a cold bath and maybe max 60 degrees, maybe somewhere between 55 and 60 degrees. You do that for a minute, go back into the hot tub for 3 minutes, back to the cold tub for 1 minute, hot tub again for 3 minutes, your final hot tub, and then end, yes, I said end, on cold for that last minute. And then you get out, and ideally you'll rest for about 15 minutes after that. You could read or just sit quietly and that sort of thing. But it is really helpful. But not everybody has the opportunity to use a hot tub and a cold bath. So one of the things we recommend too is doing it in the shower. If you live in California like we do, we don't like to use a lot of water. So maybe you can do it shorter terms, like maybe a minute hot, minute cold, or half a minute cold, back and forth. And you always end on cold. Yeah, it's also good for us ladies too, because we like to have our skin be really nice, and you don't want to end with your pores all open. So the cold actually closes the pores too. And so we recommend that. And one of the things that I do, I'm just going to give you a tip that makes it a little bit easier. I shampoo my hair, and then I turn it cold, and I'm forced to stay in there until all the shampoo is out of my hair. That way I'm not cheating. So I have to do little tricks to make sure I stay in it the whole time, but it's not that bad after you've done it several times. So
yes, you get more resilient over time.
Yes, you become more resilient, or your skin knows what to do when it's in it.
Right. I'm grateful. See, I even learned some beauty tips there. I didn't think about the whole pore thing, but thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, I learned that too. So I wanted to share. So we did the exercise, we did hydrotherapy, then we talked about food and fuel and even intermittent fasting. Anything else physically?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I would mention physically is just the importance of sleep. And if we're not getting decent rest, that can be very difficult to bounce back. And so I realize there's certain circumstances, especially when maybe there's a newborn baby, or maybe there's what's going on right now in Ukraine, like a war going on. Sleep is going to be hard to come by, but you want to do the best you can to get a good night's sleep. So you want to set the stage with having as much as possible, a cool, dark room, minimizing any media exposure before bedtime, trying to get to sleep before midnight. Well, ideally by around 10 o'clock is really ideal to get some actual Z's before midnight, because
the good REM.
That's right. You'll get into, actually it's not the REM. The REM comes later, and it's actually the deep stage 3-4 sleep that you're getting into, which is the most restorative sleep. And so sleep is very, very important.
And one of the things too, I'm thinking of some of the people who are in these areas that we're talking about that are war torn. It might be helpful for people to take turns, like if you feel really stressed, having somebody willing to say, hey, I'll stay up for a while you get some sleep, and then I'll be here, and then somebody else taking a turn or something like that might actually make it a little bit easier to sleep because sleep is such a vulnerable thing to do. And if you're in an environment like that, just having somebody who's willing to be alert while the others are tag team it.
Absolutely. No, that's a great idea.
So then the next one we can talk about is the mind. And we already started with some of that.
Yeah. I want to encourage our listeners to listen to our other episode on resilience, because that will help to really get a little more clarity on how we can develop a positive
the groundwork for it. Yeah.
A mindset. But research is very clear that it's so important, not as much the stressors we encounter, but how we then respond to that. What our mindset is, dealing with the challenges, with the threats, with the trauma that we've experienced. And a lot of times we call at least parts of that reframing. And so I think that's critical.
And we don't even realize how important this is, because, I know that even within pain management, people who are physically going to endure chronic pain for the rest of their lives, the biggest thing is not medication with that. It's actually the cognitive behavioral therapy aspect that can even reduce the amount of intensity of that pain that the body experiences just by changing the way we think about it. And so you've kind of touched on that in the first episode. So anything else you have to say about mindset in this one, practically speaking, that we can do?
Yeah. And just to dovetail on what you mentioned, I think whether it's physical or psychological pain that we're dealing with, it can so much change depending on how we think about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, a couple other things along those lines. Sometimes it is very difficult if someone is feeling so overwhelmed with stress and trauma to even think right and change your thoughts. And that's where there's something that we call grounding, which can actually help significantly. And when we talk about grounding, basically it's talking about being present, bringing it to the here and now, being aware of your surroundings in a healthy, calmer way. And so deep breathing can often really help with that. Oftentimes people will be like, well, I took a deep breath, but that's not enough. So usually people would need to breathe deeply, slowly, for about 2 minutes to really calm down sufficiently. And I use the simple rule of fives, like you breathe in 5 seconds, hold it for 5 seconds, and then you breathe out slowly for 5 seconds, and you just count, and you just do it nice and slow, deep breaths, allow your diaphragm to come down. And again, do that for at least 7 cycles, 2 minutes or so, and you'll be surprised, how much that can calm you down. And then after that, it's easier to start engaging in a more healthy mindset instead of just like feeling like a deer in the headlights or you're freaking out.
Yeah, sometimes we need something to separate us from the rawness of the emotion that we're experiencing. And that deep breathing is one of the ways that you can sort of like detach yourself just for a minute so that you can get your bearings to be able to do some of the thinking.
Exactly.
Stuff too.
Yeah. And one other thing along those lines is actually getting out into nature. Studies are very clear on how much that helps people's stress when they get out into a natural setting and they're in the forest or a lake or a beach or something like that. That really helps to bring down that stress level. So that's about all on the mind part.
Okay. And how about the spirit part?
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, and there's other things we could focus in on the spirit part, but how do we keep our spirits and our spiritual life and our spirits in a good state of
Mm-hmm.
being? One of the key factors there is actually gratitude. Gratitude has been shown to really help mental health significantly, help people cope with stress in a better way. And it also is really beautiful because it sets the stage for people to connect in relationships too. So people that
Mm-hmm.
tend to be more grateful actually tend to have better relationships with other people. And I think that makes sense, right? Because I don't know about you, Amanda, but do you like to be around negative, pessimistic people?
You'd think so sometimes.
Yeah, because you're a therapist, right? I mean,
that's probably not the best answer, but no, I actually like helping people get a better mindset, but ideally I would like all of my clients to have a healthy mindset and be grateful. And I do make them do that in groups every day. So they do have to do that. I have to encourage even my surroundings to have a better attitude as well.
And do you notice a change, like even in them as they're thinking of things they can be grateful for?
I do. And one of the things I like to encourage, because sometimes we do things out of habit even, and we don't have to use a lot of our brain to do it. You know, like if you say, Amanda, what are you grateful for? I'm grateful for a roof over my head. I'm grateful for life. And well, those are kind of the pat answers everybody does. But if you try to think outside of the box, or even say, instead of saying, oh, I'm grateful for my husband, I'm grateful for my husband because of this and this and this and this and that. Now I've really invested in my gratitude.
Yes, I love that. And that's one thing that a patient told me several years ago that really stuck with me too. He said, when I practice gratitude, I don't just say list of what I'm grateful for, but why. And I think that's very powerful. And I want to encourage our listeners to make that a habit, a practice in their own lives. And you can very simply make gratitude a habit by practicing it. And one of the simple things you can do is attach gratitude with things you already do every day. For example, maybe every day you brush your teeth, hopefully. So every day that
twice.
Yes, hopefully twice or 3 times. When you're brushing your teeth, just remind yourself, I'm going to say one thing that I'm grateful for. And so by doing those sorts of little things, it can actually start really shifting our mindset. And ultimately, I think it can also open us up to a higher connection with God too, realizing that, even though I'm maybe struggling in certain areas, I can be grateful because I do have a loving Father in heaven that is caring for me, that he has a plan, even though I don't understand maybe everything that's happening right now, that I can trust him, and that, this world, it's difficult, but this isn't all we have.
Yeah. And I don't know, I play this sort of like weird game with myself sometimes. I always think like in terms of, I believe that there's also a devil in this world. And I like to think, what would really upset him? If he's trying to mess with me right now, what would be the biggest insult I could do to foil his plans? That would be to thank God in all circumstances. And so I think like, I can really ruin what he's trying to do in this situation by being grateful. And I told my husband this the other day. And right after I did that, I dropped something on my foot.
and he was probably like, all right, now's your opportunity.
And I literally said, like, thank you, God. And I wanted to yell other things, but I did it. And we both laughed about it afterwards. So the pain was quite minimal, in fact, because I wasn't even focusing on it. But I was like, yes, I did it. At least I was reminded right before it
That's
happened.
Right. That is right.
I don't think I would have been prone to do that if I hadn't just said it to my husband at the time.
That is funny. Yeah. And that actually reminds me of a story that I wanted to end with. And this story was from World War II. And some of our listeners might be familiar with Corrie ten Boom.
I love her story.
Yeah. She was an amazing woman who worked very hard with her family to actually hide a lot of the Jews that were being persecuted by the Nazis. And eventually they were found out, and she and her sister and her father, and I'm not sure about her mother, but anyway, their whole family
the mother wasn't there.
Their family was put into a concentration camp. And this concentration camp, she was there with her sister, and it was infested with fleas. It was just disgusting. You know, it was dirty and there's fleas all over. And they read in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 in the Bible that you should be thankful in all things, in all circumstances. And Corey was like, what? So we're supposed to be thankful for these fleas? And her sister Elizabeth was like, well, it says in all circumstances. So they're like, okay, thank you, you know, kind of gritted teeth, like, thank you, God, I guess, for these fleas. Well, it was very interesting because later on, they found out that it was actually because of the fleas that they had a lot more freedom in the concentration camp than they normally would have. In other words, the guards didn't want to come into where the prisoners were, or the detainees or whatever that you call them, were staying because there were so many fleas.
And they didn't want them all over them.
Right. And so they had a lot more freedom. So sometimes the very things that were like, oh, I hate this, I don't like this, God can bring good out of that. And again, it's not that we ask for these things, but if we trust God, and we realize he sees that bigger picture, good things can still come out of it.
And Corey didn't even know. Corey's sister was the one who was encouraging her to be thankful. And she's like, no, I don't want to be thankful for this, only to find out later that it was because of the fleas that she was left alone, she and her sister and the others and stuff. And I think that's so cool. I love those stories where we think it's as bad as it could be, and we realize, no, it could actually be worse, and we are actually spared from some of those things.
Exactly.
So, thanks for sharing that story. I love that story. It's a great book if you ever want to read The Hiding Place.
Yes, it is.
Well, I think that wraps that up for all of the practical things that we can do in order to build resilience in difficult situations and be able to handle those situations a lot better. And we just welcome you with us today and hope you enjoyed the things that you've heard and you're able to take those back with you and continue to listen to us on the Brain People podcast. And with that, we're out. Thanks for listening. To hear more episodes, find us on social media, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.